Hey everyone, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to part 9 of my Logic Pro 10 101 series. In this video, we're going to add our rhythm guitars and bass tracks to the mix, and we're going to toy around with the guitar amp tone quite a bit as well. So if you'd like to work along with me, the multi-track Logic session is available via the link in the video description below. So first, let's just add in the rhythm guitars with the drums that we mixed in the last video, and let's see how they sound. So I'm just going to collapse my drum stack here, unsolo it, hit X to hide my mixer, and let's just unmute the guitars for now. We'll skip the bass and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Okay, so one of the problematic things about guitar, I always feel myself torn between making the guitars too bright and present, which stand out in the mix well, but they can tend to sound a little too raspy or tinny or crispy sounding. Making the tone really deep and full is the other option, but then sometimes that can sound muffled, kind of like it does here. We got kind of like a nice meaty tone, but it's kind of muffled sounding. I really don't want that. So I kind of want the best of both worlds. I want a little bit of crispiness, and I also want some of the beefiness without it starting to sound like muddy. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start completely from scratch with our rhythm guitar tones. So right here and here, guitar left and right are our rhythm guitars. We're going to come back to the leads in the next video. I'm actually going to reset the channel strips on both of these. So I'm going to click on the setting tab up here, and you go down to reset channel strip. And what that'll do is reset both of those channel strips to default. I'm going to pull down the volume just a little bit because I know it's going to need it. I'm still going to pan them left and right, 50 to the left, 50 to the right. Let's actually start with the right guitar. I'm going to go down to amps and pedals, and then go over to amp designer. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to use two different guitar tones to vary the guitar tones between the left and the right channels. Now, not only does this create a richer, fuller overall tone, it also helps with mono compatibility and phase cancellation issues between the left and the right channels. Anytime you double something left and right, double track something left and right, and they sound too close to each other and the tones and the frequencies are too close to each other, you can end up with phase cancellation when the mix is converted to mono. So I found that when you vary one guitar channel slightly from the other tone-wise, you end up with a better result. So the model that we're going to use, you can choose a model down here of a combined amp and cabinet, or you can individually choose an amp and a cabinet. The one we're going to use is called the Brown Stack, which is actually the same setting that we used before. We're just going to tweak it a little bit. So what we're going to do with this is let's pull the gain up a bit more. Let's pull the bass down a little bit because I don't want the guitar to sound muddy. One thing I do not do in my guitar mixes is I do not scoop the mids very much. I'm not a fan of scooping mids. I like to hear the mids. We'll pull the treble down a little bit, turn the reverb off, turn the effects off. The presence can stay. Let's go down a little bit more because this is rhythm guitar. It's not lead guitar. And we'll pull the master down just a little bit, and let's see what that sounds like. Let's just solo just that right guitar. All right, cool. So another thing we can control is the type of microphone emulation we have on the cab. I am a huge fan of ribbon mics on guitar cabs. What we are going to do is we're going to use a ribbon mic on the right guitar, and we're going to use a dynamic mic on the left guitar just to, again, vary the tones. So the Ribbon 101 or 121 models the Royer 121 R121 ribbon mic, which is a staple microphone that's used in hundreds of I've used in hundreds of guitar recordings. In addition to choosing the mic that you want, you can also choose the placement of the mic. Now, real quick. Typically, the closer you get, the more bass frequencies you're going to get. The more you move back, the less bass you're going to get. And then as you move off axis, you'll lose some of the high end. So if you want something really bright and really full and direct, put it directly in front of it. If you want something that's a little more distance, you can pull it back. I'm going to go sort of like in the upper left quadrant here, just slightly off axis. So let's see what this sounds like. Cool, I like that. All right, so that's our first amp setting. Let's move over to the left guitar. Let's solo that out. We're gonna add amp designer on this as well. And we're gonna use a completely different amp this time. For this one, I'm actually gonna use a custom setup with an unmatched amp and cabinet. So it's not gonna be located under the model menu here. For this, I'm going to use the modern American head. This model's a Mesa dual rectifier head. By the way, the brown one modeled a Marshall Super Lead Plexi, so it's good for distortion at low levels, as is the Mesa. So, but instead of using the matched sort of Mesa cab, I'm going to use the vintage British 4x12 cab with this. So an American head with a British cab. All right, so for this, let's just play with the gain and the EQ and everything. Let's pull the gain up a little bit more. Again, this is a rock song after all. Pull the bass down. Again, I don't want it to be too muddy. I'm going to pull the mids up quite a bit because, again, like I said before, I don't like scooped mids. Treble is good where it's at. Turn the reverb off. Turn the effects off. Presence, let's pull it down a little bit. And the master, we can pull down a little bit as well. Now, instead of using a ribbon mic here, we're going to use this Dynamic 421. Now, this mic is a dynamic mic. This models the Sennheiser MD421, which is a very, very common microphone, not only for guitar cabs and bass cabs, but also for toms on drum kits. So for this, let's play around with the mic position and find a spot where we like it. Yeah, so a little bit closer to the center, but a little bit further away. I like the tone, but it doesn't have enough gain to it. So what I'm going to do with this amp is I'm going to add the pedal board and add a drive pedal before the amp. So for this, we're going to go down to amps and pedals. I'm going to go over to pedal board. And from here, I'm going to add this very first pedal called Vintage Drive. It's just a vintage overdrive. And let's see how that affects the tone. So it's a little more chunky sounding with this pedal. What I'm going to do, though, is we're going to tweak the tone of the actual amp a bit, though. There really wasn't enough bass before. So I get this sort of brighter, raspier tone with this sort of warmer, meatier tone. And when we blend the two together, we get sort of a little bit of both. So let's try this with the drums kicked in now. So I still feel like it needs to be a little more rich and more harmonically dense. And I also want to do a few things to it with an EQ, but I don't want to do each individual track. What I want to do is I want to put these into a summing stack like we did with the drums in the previous video. So I'm going to select both of these rhythm guitars, go up to track, go down to create track stack, or hit Shift Command D, choose a summing stack. And there we go. So now I can call this rhythm guitars. And I can add whatever effects I want on here to sort of bus process both of these. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a plugin called the Exciter. The Exciter you can find under Specialized. And what the exciter is it's a harmonic exciter is what it is. It's a harmonic enhancer plugin. So you can roll around where you want the excitation to be, more of a lower excitation or a brighter excitation. You can also choose how much of that harmonic exciting you want going on. So now we've got that brightness that I was talking about before mixed with the sort of fullness of our guitar tones. I'm going to go ahead and use color 2 because it's a little bit warmer and I feel like it is a little too bright. Okay, so lastly on the rhythm guitar bus, I'm going to add the linear phase EQ. In the last video, we talked about the difference between the channel EQ and the linear phase EQ, but when I'm doing bus processing and mastering, I like to use the linear phase EQ because there's less phase interactions and phase cancellation between each of the bands. So essentially, it's just a cleaner EQ. So one thing I'm going to do, like I've been doing all along, is I'm going to high pass the guitars because there's no reason any of this sub bass frequency needs to be down here. So I'm going to high pass it around 50 hertz. I am going to put a 500 hertz dip in here, just a slight one. And I know I said I don't really like to scoop the mids, but that's about as much mid scooping as you're going to get out of me. It's a 2 dB reduction at 500 hertz, just to help it to not sound muddy. But what I'm going to do in return is around 1,000 hertz. I'm going to bump it up. This is going to give us some upper mid high improvement. So let's see what this sounds like now. Cool. Now, the only thing I'm not liking about these rhythm guitars so far is that they sound like they're very, very much they're digital recreations of modeled amps, and you can only get so far. And I want this just to sound more like it was recorded in a real tracking studio in a room. So what I'm going to do is on my rhythm guitar summing stack, I'm going to add a send, and you can add that right here. Now, if you don't know what a send is, it's essentially a way to send signal. Think of it as an auxiliary line where the signal can go to another track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose bus 3 here. You'll see that the drums and guitars are already using bus 1 and 2 for their track stacks. So I'm going to choose bus 3. I'll pull this up just a little bit here. And then what you may or may not have noticed is all the way over here, an auxiliary channel strip or aux track was created with an input of bus 3 automatically. So if we solo just that aux track, you can see that the signal of the rhythm guitars is coming through that based on the amount of send you give it right here. So the higher up this goes, the more signal you're going to get over here on your aux channel. What I want to do is on this aux track, I'm going to call this guitar room. And I'm going to add a plugin called Space Designer under reverbs. Space Designer is a reverb plugin, but it's also very good at modeling certain sized rooms. So the preset that I'm going to choose, I'm going to go up here to factory default. I'm going to go down to small rooms and then medium chamber is what we're going to use. Now you can adjust the blend between the dry signal and the reverb or wet signal, but when you apply Space Designer to an aux track, it automatically sets the dry signal to 0 because when you add reverb this way, you want to just have the wet signal, just the reverb signal on the aux track, and then have the dry signal over on the summing stack or the individual track where the audio is coming from. So there's no reason to pull up the dry here because we're already going to hear the dry over here on the rhythm guitar's track stack. So let's see what this sounds like by itself. So it sounds sort of like a medium-sized room. Let's blend that with the guitar summing stack. So it gives us the illusion that the amps were recorded in a real acoustic space as opposed to being modeled with a guitar amplifier plugin. Okay, let's move on to the bass guitar. Bass guitar is pretty simple. As I mentioned before, I synthesized it with a different plugin that wasn't available in Logic. I used the native instrument, one of the native instruments basses. So I just have this sort of quasi-distorted bass tone here. But the signal is still DI, it's not amped yet. So we're gonna use a plugin called Amp Designer, or Bass Amp Designer rather. So we're gonna go down to Amps and Pedals. We're gonna choose Bass Amp Designer this time. There's a whole bunch of different models that you can choose from. We're gonna use a custom configuration again. I'm gonna use the one called the Flip Top Amp. And then I'm gonna use a big cabinet called the Classic 8x10 cabinet. And just like before, you can choose the placement of the microphone. I am going to use the Dynamic 20. This is a model of the Electro Voice RE20. So I'm just going to keep this in line all the way up front for bass. And let's pull the gain up a bit. The EQ we'll put on, but we'll basically we're going to keep the setting the same. Although we're going to turn the built-in compressor on. Let's pull the compressor up quite a bit. Keep the gain at about half and then the master about half. You can also show or hide a parametric EQ up here. I'm going to roll off a little of the high end. And there we go. So let's see what our bass sounds like now that it's amped. And you can see that our channel strip is clipping. And this is not just a matter of adjusting the fader, because remember we set this to pre-fader metering. So no matter what I do here, it's still going to clip. So what we need to do is we need to compensate for this 3D clip by pulling down the master or pulling down the output. So let's play around with that. So anyway, so that's that. Let's add one more plugin to the bass. I'm going to add the compressor, Dynamics compressor. I'm going to use the vintage FET because I want the front end of my notes to be a little more punchy. I'm going to use some pretty heavy compression, not really in the threshold range, but on the ratio. I'm going to pull this up to 12:1. Pull the makeup gain up a little bit. Turn off the auto gain. The knee can stay where it's at. The attack can be a little bit longer, so we hear a little bit more of the transient come through. The release a little bit longer. And for the mix, I really do want to hear a lot of the compressed signal, so I'm just going to pull this down to somewhere around 80%. And I want a lot of distortion, so we're going to kick in the clip distortion. So let's give this a listen now. Perfect. So we've got very sort of flat dynamics, but we still hear a little bit of the punch of each individual bass note. So let's give all of this a listen. I'm just going to sort of dial in the levels of the drums, the guitars, and the bass and make them sit together well in the mix. So I'll start from the intro and then play through a bit. Yeah, I adjusted there's 3 different low settings on some of these amps where you get sort of like a deep low, a mid low, and then like a high low. So I switched it to the deep low, so I get more of the fundamental bass and less of the mid range and high bass sounds. So just one more time, let's check this out over here. Cool, it's sounding a lot better. In the next video, we'll add in the lead guitars. And just to jump back to one thing here, you probably noticed in the snare compressor, I pulled up the makeup gain a lot and pulled the threshold down quite a bit. The snare was getting buried in the mix and the kick was too high, so I was just playing around with that to make the snare have more thwack to it and really cut through the guitars. And that's kind of like what I said in the last video. Some of the changes I made probably seemed extreme, but in the end, the goal is to make the kick and the snare and the toms really still cut through the guitars as thick as they are. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, check me out on my social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Patreon. I'll leave links down to those in the video description below. Also, again, check out the multi-track session for this song. It comes with both a raw version that's completely unmixed, so you can start from part 8 and then work through the mixing and mastering. And it also comes with a fully mixed version that won't be exactly like what we do in this, but it's the same mix as the video that I posted a few days ago of the full playthrough of the song. So it'd be a very close mix to what we end up with in this video series. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching.